morning, church. Good morning. Well, you can see on the screen we're starting a new series today on the book of Revelation. Don't get too excited. You can hear the dread already coursing through the crowd. No, I'm really looking forward to this series, and partly because I know that we have a room full of women who are well educated in Revelation. You've just finished a study. And I'm so looking forward to the conversation and insights that I hope this conversation stirs up. We're doing this kind of deep dive into probably the most misread and wildly interpreted book in the entire Bible, which is ironic given its name. In Greek, the name of this book is the Apocalypse. Which in our imaginations, when we hear the word apocalypse, automatically we go to destruction. We imagine an asteroid slamming into the earth, or nuclear war, or the most dreaded natural disaster of all, Sharknado. Or just our imaginations go flying when we hear the word apocalypse. We think it's the end of the world, it's destruction. But that's not what apocalypse means. What the word actually means is to reveal. That's why it's called Revelation. It's a translation of apocalypse. Revelation, we're revealing something. Something is being unveiled. Something we couldn't see before. John, the author of Revelation, is trying to pull back the curtains so that we might be able to see something new, something that we hadn't seen before. And as we start this journey, we're actually going to start partway in the book. We're going to start with Revelation chapter 4 and 5. And partly because chapters 1 through 3 kind of serve as an introduction to the book. And it's the part of the book that we're most comfortable with. It's the letters to the 7 churches. And we know how to manage those because we're pretty good, especially in churches of Christ, with the letters from Paul. This feels like firm territory here when we get to the letters in Revelation. It's after that things start freaking us out. And so I want to start there. I want to start with the vision itself. Because the truth is, what happens in chapters 4 and 5 is the very center of the letter. It's the center of gravity for everything that comes before and after. And we have to have a clear vision, I think, of what happens in chapters 4 and 5 in order for us to hear it rightly, to hear Revelation rightly. And so we're going to start with these first words of Revelation chapter 4. After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I'll show you what must take place after this." Years ago, Kristen and I went on a family trip with some of our best family friends. And we were going to go explore Carlsbad Caverns in Mexico. We found a hotel to stay in, and it was one, I don't know if you've stayed in a room like this, where there's 2 separate rooms, but there's a door between them. All right. That's how I felt too. It was exciting. Because all of a sudden you open the door, and what was just 2 separate family vacations all of a sudden becomes a giant slumber party, right? We had 3 kids, they have 4 kids, and there are just children everywhere in these 2 hotel rooms that are conjoined. There's kids sleeping on a couch on the floor, there's a baby in the bathtub, there's kids everywhere. There's one giant slumber party because the door opened. And what looked like 2 separate rooms, all of a sudden you realize, oh no, this is actually one space. That's what's happening when we enter Revelation chapter 4. It starts with this open door. And what we realize is this reality of earth, what we see, the material world around us, is one room of reality. But if you open the door, there's this whole other connected room the realm of heaven. And it has things coming and going and things we don't normally see. Most of the time, the door between heaven and earth is firmly shut. We don't know what's going on over here. But in Revelation, the door swings open and John walks through. And all of a sudden, we get to see not only what's going on in heaven, we also realize that these are actually conjoined rooms. That what happens on earth echoes in heaven, and what happens in heaven affects what happens here on earth. It's one space, one room. And Revelation opens the door between it. John sees this open door. He gets to peer into something most human beings don't ever see. Well, he's not the first one to see it, though. He's echoing an experience Ezekiel had. Ezekiel chapter 1, if you read through that, it sounds so much like what we read in Revelation. What's happening there, once again, is an open door to heaven. Ezekiel looks and he sees these creatures, the same creatures that show up in Revelation, by the way. And there's these wheels spinning and there's this throne. The door of heaven is open. Or I think of Jesus' baptism. Mark tells us that the heavens were torn open at the moment of Jesus' baptism, and it's the Holy Spirit that comes down out of heaven onto earth in a visible way, landing on him like a dove. Or I think about what happens on the Mount of Transfiguration. There are Peter, James, and John. And usually they see Jesus just as a human being, just like they are. But in this moment, on that mountain, he shines with all the glory of God. They see a picture of what is happening in heaven as Jesus walks with them. Because for them, just for a moment, the door is open. Or I think about Paul on the road to Damascus, blinded by this bright light and hearing the voice of God. Paul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Jesus of Nazareth. It's what he'll describe later in 2 Corinthians as being caught up to the third heaven. As for Paul, once again, the door has swung open and he sees into heaven. Or it's what Stephen, the first martyr of the church, experienced. That as they're about to stone him, he looks up and he says, I see heaven open. And I see Jesus standing there at the right hand of the throne of God. And all seeing slightly different angles of the same thing. They open the door, they peer into heaven, and what they see is the truth. They see reality as it actually exists. What most of us, most of the time, are blind to. It's because it's so hard to get over the illusions that are so powerful, that draw us in, that seem realer than what is real in heaven. And that's especially true for the people that John is originally writing to in the first century. There were powerful illusions that they're being caught up in. Because it looks like that the Roman Empire is the most powerful force on earth. And who could think otherwise? The wealthiest, the most powerful, the most violent. Everything Rome wants, it gets. And it looks like the Roman emperor is the most powerful person on the planet, almost possessing a godlike quality, a godlike control of the universe as they know it, and expects to be treated accordingly. It looks like they are following a failed Messiah in a long line of other failed messiahs who tried to start a revolution against Rome and failed and failed and failed. And Jesus looks like the latest version of that. He died on a Roman cross, betrayed by his own people. That's what it looks like, or it looks like they're maybe buying into a foolish fairy tale about how God is going to make everything right someday. It looks like maybe they've been brainwashed into dying for a cause that is doomed to fail. Because for so many of them, they were drawn into the church, drawn into Christianity because of hope. It offered them something in a world that looked like it's going awry, that had challenged them and confronted them and taken from them. Here is something that offers hope. And so sign me up for that, but for so many of them, it looks like their lives have just gotten worse since they started following Jesus. It doesn't look like the world is much different on the other side of them following him or him being here among us. And they're trying to make sense of it all, and some of them are in a place of despair. What have we given our lives to? Are the promises that I bought into really going to be fulfilled? Because the illusions are everywhere. That looks real. Or some of them have just decided to go along with the illusion. It's easier to exist as if these illusions are true. And so they compromise themselves, losing the grip on the way of Jesus and submerging more and more into the ways of the world. And what both of those groups need, both those in despair and those compromising, what they both need is truth. They need to see reality as it actually is. And that's what we get in Revelation chapter 4. The door is open. John sees into heaven. And then he hears this voice that says, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this." And I want to make sure we hear this rightly. I think so many of us have this idea that Revelation, what it's mostly trying to do is predict the future. Tell us what the end of the world is going to be like. But that's not what's happening in Revelation 4 and 5. No, what we're getting in Revelation 4 and 5 is a picture of reality as it is right now. Right now. This is what heaven looks like. And he says, okay, I want you to see this because I want you to see what must take place right after this. And the image I think we need to have is of a couple dancing. Two different people, but one dance. And one is following the other. And in Revelation 4 and 5, it's heaven that leads earth. Heaven takes a step and earth follows. Because what is true right now in heaven must be true on earth soon. That we get this snapshot, this picture of what is about to take place, not because it hasn't happened yet, but because it already is true. It already is true. And earth is going to follow suit real soon. And so he goes through the door and he peers into what must take place on earth very soon. And what does he see? This is Revelation 4, verse 2. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. We don't know who yet. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. And from the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. John peers through the door, and what does he see? He sees a throne. And he sees someone on the throne, but he can't quite make out who it is yet. Because he's so shrouded in light and glory and color. He can't make it out. And there's so much imagery here just in these short verses. There's the jasper and the ruby and the rainbow of light, the 24 elders, the lamps. And if we talked about all of that, we would be here for hours. There's so many little details and revelation that deserve whole sermon series in themselves. But what I really want us to hear is the message here. What do we need to hear? What is this calling us into? And I will invite you to Bible class. Gail and I are going to be taking the next 7 weeks. We started today. And we're gonna be able to have more time to unpack some of those details. And so if you want to dive into that, come join us on Sundays at 9 o'clock in the ministry building. But for now, I want to take a bigger picture. And there's one detail here that I want to draw out. And it's that sea of glass, that last vision. The sea as clear as crystal. This sea is the opposite of Galveston, right? Picture Galveston is the opposite of that, right? No waves, perfectly clear. And it's this vision, though, that the Bible goes back to again and again and again. There's all these times that the sea, the ocean, the waters show up. At the very beginning of the Bible, it is the waters that God tames. It's how he brings order to all things. The first thing to do is to bring order to the water. And then once you do that, now we're off to the races, creating all things. And in the imagination of ancient people, it is the sea that is full of threat and chaos. There are monsters that lurk there. And within the sea, there is a power that human beings can do nothing about. We're powerless to stand against. The ocean will go where the ocean wants to go. And the only thing we can do is pray. We're powerless before it. But here is one on the throne. Not sure who yet. But in front of his throne, waters are still. Not a single ripple. And who could it be that has the power to bring that kind of peace? Who could still waters? We find out at the beginning of chapter 5, verse 1. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. And I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. And then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." And then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. I think this right here, these first few verses of chapter 5, are the single most important verses of the entire book. This is the central image, and we have to hear this rightly because everything else hangs on this. And it starts with the scroll. The scroll is more than just words. What this scroll represents is God's agenda for his creation. It's not just something you read. It is a divine executive order. It's an instrument by which God's will is implemented. It's to open this scroll is to unleash God's purposes on earth, which is why it is such terrible news that no one can open it. This is the thing we've been praying for. That your will, Father, will be done here on earth just as it is in heaven. We've been longing for that day after day after day. This is what you've taught us to pray. And we get to the moment where it looks like finally the scroll is about to be unveiled and no one can open it. So of course we weep. Because we've been separated from the one thing that saves us. We need these words not only to be read, but to come true. And it shouldn't be a surprise, though, that no one can open it, right? Who could be trusted with that? Who could be trusted with that kind of power? Who could be entrusted with executing God's will on earth? Who has the character and the restraint and the wisdom and the humility and the strength to be entrusted with the enormity of that task? Whose hands could we entrust all of creation into? And that's the question. And if we have any wisdom or discernment at all, we know, looking around, no one. There's no person on earth, because we're too weak-willed and too susceptible to being corrupted by power and too vindictive and too short-sighted and too prone to favoritism and too cowardly. And so there's no one on earth that can open this scroll, and so we weep until the news comes. And the elder taps them on the shoulder. He says, look, there is one. It turns out there's one. And behold, it's the Lion of Judah. The Lion of Judah, the strength of God, the root of David, going back to those great messianic expectations that David brought, that someone along the line would be like David, who had that kind of strength to build a future for God's people. Someone would inhabit the throne with the strength of David. There is one coming who has the strength of the Lion of Judah. It says, look, there is one who has that strength. And then John looks, and what does he see? Not a lion. A lamb. Looking as if it had been slain, but still standing. Looking as if it should be dead, but he's standing on the throne. And all of a sudden, John is asking us to imagine a world in which the power of God, that his divine will, his good intention for all of creation finds expression through the Lamb who was slain. That it is our Christ crucified who represents the power of God to change all things in accordance with his will. It doesn't look like David sitting on the throne, who with his mighty hand and blood on his hands changes the world in order to save God's people. That's not who we're after. That's not who's sitting on the throne. The one on the throne has suffered, is bleeding, looks as if he's been conquered, and yet he is the one who conquers. Through the cross of Christ, all things will come under the submission of God, and it will look like, everything will have the imprint of, everything that lasts will have the selfless love of God expressed upon that Roman cross. This is the victory of God. But we have to have eyes to see it. The door has to be open in order for us to realize that is the truth. Against all the illusions, all the lies that look like we're just powerless here. That it's only the strong that survive, that might makes right. No, it is the cross that will stand. to the end of time. It is our Jesus, our slain Lamb, who is the one who determines and alters and fixes the end of all things. The future is His, and it can no longer belong to anyone else. And if that's true, if the Lamb really is on the throne, then it changes everything. I like the way Eugene Peterson says this. The stage of history is large. Larger than life figures appear on this stage from time to time, swaggering about, brandishing weapons and money, terrorizing and bullying. These figures are not, as they suppose themselves to be, at the center of the stage. Not, in fact, anywhere near the center. But they make a lot of noise and are able to call attention to themselves. They often manage to get a significant number of people watching and even admiring. Big nations, huge armies, important people. At any given moment, a few superpower nations and their rulers dominate the daily news. Every century, a few of these names are left carved on its park benches, marking rather futile and in retrospect pitiable attempts at immortality. The danger is that the noise of these pretenders to power will distract us from what is going on quietly at the center of the stage, in the person and action of God. At the very center of the stage is a lamb who looks as if he's slain, but is standing on the throne. And so Revelation is in our Bibles so that we don't become confused about who is really in charge. And let me tell you something, we can be just as easily deceived as our first century brothers and sisters. I heard about this prominent church leader who's in touch with a lot of different churches in their denomination. And he kept getting reports of the same story from multiple preachers, multiple leaders in these churches. Same story over and over again in different churches. They would come to him and say, I was preaching through the Sermon on the Mount, and I got to the part about turning the cheek, loving your enemy. And I'd have people come up to me afterwards and say, where are you getting those ideas from? And they responded, Jesus. But the response from the person asking the question wasn't, oh, my bad. The response consistently was, well, that doesn't work anymore. That's weak. And Revelation comes in as a word to wake us up, to see the kind of strength that God actually brings upon the world through the one who is slain. It's what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. This is what we preach. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews, foolishness to Gentiles. It doesn't make sense to anybody. But to those whom God has called, both Jew and Greeks, Christ is the power of God, the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. And the weakness of God is what? Stronger than human strength. You want to see the Lion of Judah? Look for the slain lamb. That is how the power of God is expressed in the world. It is the slain lamb who is the Lion of Judah. And so we, along with Paul, who will say later in 2 Corinthians, we used to regard Christ from a worldly point of view. What does that mean? It looks like we bought the illusion that the world was selling about Jesus, that here is a weak, ineffectual man who accomplished nothing. But we know the truth. He is raised to new life, and all things will bow to him. That is where things are headed. That is reality as it exists right now, church. The Lamb is on the throne. Jesus is Lord. Not Lord elect, not Lord someday, Lord right now. And it is our task to live as if that is true, come what may. Because we bow our knee already to the one we know everyone someday is going to have to bow to. We're already there. And Revelation 5 ends like this. It ends in worship. That here is this announcement that Christ, the slain Lamb, can take the scroll, can enact the will of God through the power of his cross. And what is the response from heaven and on earth? It's this. And then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. And in a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them, all things both in heaven and on earth, saying this: "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." And so we don't lose sight of that, church. When it looks around the world like everything is falling apart, what do? We join that song that is already going on. That's the reality that already exists. We join in that song that says, "Praise be alone to the Lamb who was slain." And the church says, amen. Let's stand and sing.